Good morning. I would like to welcome all of you to Business Boost for August with the Middleton Chamber of Commerce. My name is Kristen Parent. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I am super excited to kick off today's session on strategic planning, value adder or time waster. So just a few things on etiquette. We've done a million billion Zooms at this point, but please remember to keep your microphone on mute during part of this. We would love to see your cameras on. It helps to know that those beautiful faces are out there watching us, and we're not just talking to ourselves today. So I want to give also a shout out to our sponsors today. They help us make these programs possible. So a huge thank you to TDS, to Park Bank, and the QTI group. So we will be monitoring the chat throughout, although Barry and I agree that these sessions are best when they're most interactive. So please feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask those questions as we're going through. I'll help monitor the chat and can interrupt as well. But again, if you've got a burning question, please feel free to ask it. So as we get started, it is my pleasure to introduce Barry Keller. If you joined us earlier, you'll know that he is a fellow Mount Horeb alumni. So that's a fun connection that we have together. So Barry is a global manufacturing executive with 40 years of experience with industry leaders in coating, food and beverage, bioscience, and metal industries. He's led sites and organizations in US, Mexico, Brazil, France, Germany, Denmark, and the Czech Republic, and work for publicly traded businesses, private equity owners, and family businesses. Developing and implementing strategic plans has been a key part of his executive responsibilities, including his work as a board of director for 2 nonprofit organizations. So Barry, with that, I would love to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kristen, and good morning to everyone. Appreciate the introduction, and it was fun to find out that Kristen and I lived in the same place, and I'm very familiar with the southwest side of Madison, having spent lots of time there. I can also add a couple things in the introduction. Actually, I started working when I was 8 years old in the family restaurant and bar, and my dad had a business, an antique store in Mount Horeb. So I'm very familiar with all sizes of organizations, as you heard from Kristen, but also very small ones. And the other thing that I didn't put in my biography because it was still not developed yet, in the last 2 months, I've been going through a discovery process to look at starting up a manufacturing business. In the last 2 weeks, I have committed 100% to that. So I'm very excited about building this manufacturing business. And since none of you are competitors, I can tell you that it's manufacturing bacteria, and I have lots of years of experience doing that. So with that, why don't we get going? I would suggest, come on, let's go to the next slide. All right, we have our first technical glitch. Let's see. My slide won't advance. Okay. So when I don't know about you, but when I read a business book or attend a seminar or something like this, I always have a goal to learn one thing. So I would suggest, hopefully that I will give you some tips or something that's interesting to you, and you can take it away and implement it today. You're taking time away from your busy schedules and your businesses to learn. I would say take very few notes, listen a lot, and think about something that's very important to you. Many of you have heard this saying from Peter Drucker, perhaps culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I truly believe that. I think it's always been true and always will be. And the Agile Manifesto kind of reinforces that, where they say that there's more value in people and interactions over processes and tools. I believe everything goes back to culture. Now, maybe some of you think you don't have the culture you want and you want to implement a strategy process or improve it. Can you do both at the same time? Sure. I think that if leaders demonstrate, good qualities, servant leadership, ability to listen to people, people want to follow leaders. And I think that if they see that you're honestly working on improving the culture while you're trying to implement a strategy and improve it, I think they will follow. People don't expect perfection. So a few thoughts on creating value in a strategic planning process. Organizational discipline, I think, is so important in focus. I think that this is one thing that a lot of businesses don't put enough attention on. It's very easy to chase shiny objects and try new things without sticking to a few basic things. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I believe that in all organizations, starting with a family unit, whether it's retail, manufacturing, churches, all organizations, I think the most challenging thing is to have good communication. So I would really put a lot of emphasis on that. When you're developing a strategy and rolling out, we need to involve the whole company. Everyone needs to be on board to create the greatest value. As leaders, we will gain a lot more traction if we display humility. And for me, that means in terms of strategy that we listen to people's feedback about the strategy or the strategic planning process, the tools, all of it. We'll gain better results if we listen to people and as leaders are willing to make adjustments as needed. And then I would put a lot of emphasis on connecting the whole company to customers. When I joined a business in my past, I like to walk around and hit all shifts if there's 3 shifts. And one day I was on 3rd shift and I met a guy for the first time. He'd been with the company 8 years. And I introduced myself and told him what I did. And he said to me, I've been here 8 years and I've never seen the president of the company. And you know, I don't think I'm so smart because I do those things, but it just reinforced to me that people, they want a connection. And if we don't connect them to the business of the company, they're not going to be able to help us. And it starts with the leadership. People need to know the leadership. There's some key strategic elements for a strategic plan. It all starts at the top with vision, mission, and values. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the elements of the strategic plan today, just to mention some that I think are most important. But it's very important to have this vision, mission, and values as a company. Now, I'm not so hung up that you have to have both vision and mission. Some companies just have a mission or a vision. To me, what's most important is that people know where you're going. What is it that we're going to be when we grow up as a company? What are we trying to do? And help people connect to that and do that through the values we hold. I think that it's very important. These 3 things are a precursor to having a very effective strategic planning process. In one point in my career, I joined a company, a family-run business that had been in existence for 65 years. It was 2nd generation when I entered it. And the revenue was around 25 million. It's a nice sized business, but also for 65 years in a market that was changing and consolidating, and a market in which they did a very good job. And you know, for the 6 years I was there, the 25 million, it didn't change. And why didn't it change? Well, because people didn't know where the company was going. People came to work, they did what they did every day and went home, and the company just basically stayed the same. Now, the good news is that the younger brother bought the business and he implemented a strategic plan. And when I visited him 20 years later, he had grown it through organic growth and acquisitions to about 120 million. You need a structure for your strategic planning process. I'm showing you one here, an X matrix, and I'm going to refer to this a couple times. I like the X matrix because I like the flow. It helps me visually see how things connect. I don't like the X matrix when it gets too complicated, and it's very easy to make it too complicated. So the message is, whatever structure you use to house your process, you need to make it logical and something that's easy to use. So for example, the X matrix was very popular with a company called Rexnord and actually other businesses. ITR is another one, if you're not familiar with them. And when I joined a company that used this X matrix, I was asking the CEO questions about it, and he wanted me to have 13 breakthrough objectives. And that was pretty astounding to me. And I said, well, at the end of the year at Rexnord, when you work there, how many would you typically have? And he said, well, 10. I said, well, how many would you actually accomplish? He said, sometimes none. And I just said, that's very depressing. So there was monthly reviews, and every month you talked about how you failed. So I'm very much for breakthrough objectives, for good objectives, but not impossible objectives and not things that people can't accomplish. So another story with a different twist, when I worked for Christian Hansen, I'm happy to name the company because they had a strategic planning process. It was fuzzy in a lot of ways, and it was hard to figure out some years, especially at the top, what some of the flow, the places we were supposed to go, what they look like. However, the company culture was so strong that people identified with the business and the mission so strongly that the company was still very, very successful. So there's a case where culture eats strategy for breakfast. Any questions so far? Can I stop for a second? Nothing? Okay. Another tool that I like to use in the strategic planning process is the SWOT. Now, there's 2 internal components, you're not familiar with it, and 2 external. It's a great exercise for the whole company, not just the top of the business. I've found that when you use it properly through different parts of the organization, it really helps employees get a better grasp of what reality is and how the company is seen by individuals and the leaders of the company, but also understanding what the opportunities and threats are outside the company. It really helps people get a hold of more, okay, this is our company, get a more realistic picture. I introduced this once at a plant in Germany, and I actually was surprised that the plant manager had never used the tool, and he was very skeptical about it, and he had a lot of questions, and his staff had questions. But after we went through the process and worked it through, they found it very valuable for the reasons that I just mentioned. It really helped them get a better grasp of how they fit into the big picture for this global company. I'm very much of a planner. I believe that he or she who has the best plan wins. And I put a lot of structure around planning processes, especially an annual planning wheel. As we all know, there's lots of chaos in the business world. Things are changing all the time. But it doesn't mean that you can't have some things in the strategic planning process in your business that are very repeatable and predictable. The more places that you can put that repeatability and predictability in, the better it will be for the employees. And they'll actually, I believe, be more suited, better able to handle all the change because they still have some routines. And if you study lean thinking and the lean gurus, they're very much about having flow and introducing and keeping flow in the company. And I believe you can have good flow through the planning processes. So I try to do this for sure at the beginning of the fiscal year. I lay the calendar out for the key processes. So that'll include when we have reviews, that's operational reviews, it's performance reviews. And personally, I do quarterly performance reviews because I like lots of feedback. And I also do, for my direct reports, bi-weekly meetings just to touch base. But think about what you want to cover and when, and put them in the calendar. Yes, I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but put them in the calendar. And if you have to change them at the last minute, it's okay. But people want to know when things are expected, when deliverables need to be presented or turned into top management. So I talked about the importance of communication and the need to have very clear and concise and good information communicated throughout the business. So I like to do a spreadsheet about communication, especially for big things, but it's, what do you want to communicate? Who's going to do it? when are you going to do it, the frequency, and put that in actually into the planning wheel. So maybe you want to have employee meetings once a month or whatever the frequency is, put it in the calendar, tell everybody about it, commit to it so that people can also put it into their calendars and expect it. And when you do these things, when you're more predictable and you follow through, it really helps people connect with the leadership and see that you are going to follow through and keep your promises. Err on the side of over communicating. I think, again, as human beings, we err on the side of under communicating. It's just natural. We get busy. I told you about I'm starting up this business, and as I was going through the discovery process, I wanted to bounce it off my wife more and more because I value her opinion. She's a very smart person, and I value her opinion, but she wasn't coming along with me. And then I realized that I wasn't communicating enough. And she said, I might have told her something at one point. She said, well, how long have you been thinking this? Oh, 2 months. And she says, I can't help you if you don't tell me what you're thinking and, about the conversations you're having. So I started to do that. And that was very helpful for her to evaluate. And then 2 weeks ago, we both got to the same place and said, let's go. I might have been able to shorten that learning curve or that curve had I communicated more. So keep people in the loop. We think lots of things as leaders, and we need to think, okay, does somebody need to know this? Will it help them? So celebrate success. I'm guessing that, we all have heard about this subject, recognition, celebration. But the question is, how seriously do we take it? So everyone needs to know what winning looks like. And we typically think that winning is when something works out the way it's planned, or you make a big sale, or you finish a big project successfully. And those are definitely important. But I say it's equally important to recognize what we learn through failure. And if we don't allow a climate of risk-taking in the business and reward people for risk-taking, then people won't take risks, and they'll tend to be more, closed in, and we'll just do it safe. So I believe that part of creating a learning culture is encouraging people to take risks, and I find that most people aren't going to do something stupid when you talk about risk-taking. They're going to always err on the side of being careful because they don't want to get their head bit off. They don't want to fail. So I find it very difficult to get people to go out of their comfort zone, but I encourage it very much, and then reward people. If somebody did something that was risky and failed but learned from it, super. Everybody can learn from those things. We all can. So recognition can take many forms. I won't make this into a forum on recognition, but I like to point out a few things, that it doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need a formal recognition process. They're nice, they're helpful, and people like them. But as leaders, you can do simple things like saying thank you, like writing notes to employees' homes where their family can see what their family member has done. It's stopping by people's workplaces to thank them for what they've done or what they've tried to do. I often think of an example of an employee that worked at the company for 40 some years. And my habit at the end of a fiscal year is to write all employees a thank you note, and I try to make them personable. And as you work longer, you can know more things about people if you really work at it. And this woman who'd been there for 40 some years told me one day, she said, I look forward to your letter every year. I love hearing from you. I love, basically she said, I love the recognition, and I'm always stunned, but also like, okay, that's why we do these things. People want to be heard. They want to be recognized. We all do. They want to be known. And the more things that we can do to connect the dots for people and recognize good behaviors, the more that we're going to have success as a business. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about when strategy the process is a time waster. Now this gal here looks extremely talented. She can cross her hands on the keyboard and do her work while balancing a pencil between her lip and nose. And it's pretty impressive. I haven't tried that myself, but it looks impressive. But it's probably not what we want our employees to spend their time doing when they're working on strategy. And it's humorous, but lots of people find things to do when they don't know what to do or what they're supposed to do. So I go back to this topic of organizational discipline. I just believe that we all need order. We need boundaries, that organizational discipline is not a creativity killer. If it's handled correctly, it actually enhances creativity. And for me, I start with housekeeping. Of course, it has safety ramifications, but enforcing good housekeeping, whether it's the office or the plant or outside, whatever your business is, it sends a message that order is important to the leader. And people want that sense of order. You have to be careful, though, that we don't micromanage this process and we don't get too controlling. Now, I'm a housekeeping fanatic, and people learn that about me very, very quickly in businesses. And they realize it's important to me. And so they start working on it, especially when I take photographs on my phone and send it to department managers when I get back to my office, and to reinforce the point. So we need to find those appropriate doses of leadership in this whole discipline process without controlling people. So that takes a lot of work at it, but it can be done. So there was a guy at a business that I worked at, the plant manager, and his goal was that he would no longer get photos from me. That means that he had succeeded in his housekeeping. And from the time within 1 year when I started doing it, that plant improved a lot. But that was his motivation, recognition, and when I sent him a photo, he would fix it, and I would immediately go out and look at it and tell him thank you. Often the strategy process is not understood. So if people don't understand, they can get confused, frustrated, again, spend times on things that are not adding value that they shouldn't be spending time on. But this is really an easy one to fix. It's about removing doubts about the process by communicating again what the process is, and remembering it starts with the vision and mission and values. And just you can look at the pyramid and say, okay, do my people understand? Go out and ask them. Go out on the floor or go out wherever your business is conducted. Go and ask people, do you understand? So using the X matrix, another example from that process, when I started using it at a company, I said, okay, can somebody tell me what's the training process? How do we use the X matrix? And I was sent by a couple people that had been using it for some years, some examples, incomplete. So maybe I was sent Form A and I was shown 2 different examples. So I thought, okay, which is the right one? And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the process was. And again, that's just a time waster, and it's unnecessary to have to do that. We all work in different sized businesses, and I think we all probably share a common desire not to burden people down with the things that don't add value. So structure is important, and as an organization grows, it's critical to add the right kind of structure. As we've talked about, I worked in all sorts of sizes of business and types of businesses, and it's really challenging at times to scale a business when you focus on the structure, but it's very, very important. So what's the right amount? That's a good question. That's a topic for another day. But remember, we don't want people to spend their time working on maintaining a system. We want them to spend time creating value. Again, with the X matrix, there was a lot of pressure to produce certain reports in formats that took a lot of time, and my team didn't understand why the CEO was requesting it. So they became confused and frustrated because they were spending too much time on something that was not creating value and letting them drive the business. I'll just take a quick pause. Anything, Kristen, there? Nope, keep going.
We did have one question that came in, and it says, how can you implement strategic planning in a small business that's 5 million to 15 million in sales with a flat organization structure? How do you implement strategic planning in a small business with a flat structure?
Well, I think I might need to know more about the question, but if I'm thinking, is it because you don't have a lot of people to do it, because the organization is flat, and I've worked in those, well, you just have to have a simpler process, and just figure out what are the key elements that you need to drive, and figure out then who in that flat organization can take on those tasks or those leadership tasks or whatever. But it's also about the people. Whatever size organization we have, we need to make sure that we have the right people in the organization to do those things. And if we don't, we either need to find them inside and train them and teach them, or we need to find them on the outside and bring them in. Does that help? If the person had the question, I can follow up more late if needed. Okay. Just one other comment. I think that the size of the organization doesn't have to be a barrier to having a successful process. I mean, you can have a 3-person business, and I'm going to start up a business, and I know that I'm going to have me and 2 other employees in year 1, and we will have a strategy process. It'll be simple, and because we don't have lots of people that we have to deploy to, but we will have a process. And by the way, I didn't mention at the beginning, I have been doing some consulting while I've been in between roles, and if people are interested in having more conversations with me, I'd be happy to do that. My contact information is at the end of the presentation, so feel free to reach out if you have a question. Be happy to answer. If you want to do something longer, we can talk about it. So oftentimes the strategy itself is not clear, and this is really a common theme in all business sizes. But it's actually easy to fix. We just need to figure out how to connect the dots and talk to the people and say, help me, tell me what isn't clear. It's part of leaders' responsibility to keep in touch with the people in the organization and keep communicating and just ask what's not clear. My goal is that for every employee in the organization, when they walk through the door every day, they know that what they do that day is going to create value for the company. And maybe it's measured in some way through a chart in the wall. And if the employee doesn't understand how what they do connects to that chart and how they can change what's on that chart, then it's just wallpaper. It's useless. Don't even put it up. But the idea is to figure out how to connect the dots for everyone, so they know clearly that what they do is going to help the company create more value. It's so important not to waste employees' time and talents. Whoops, I missed one. Oftentimes strategy is not consistently deployed. So maybe there's pockets in the organization that know more about where they're going, and others like, what do they know that we don't know, or why are we missing something? No one should think in the organization that somebody else or some other team knows more than they do about the strategy. So again, it's just talking with the people, looking at the process, getting feedback, asking questions. We don't want people to feel left out. So often we don't have a very good planning and review cycle. Again, be consistent, be predictable, plan ahead, help the company to focus on what's most important. Okay, but don't overload the organization with too many plans and too much review. Again, what's the right amount? That's every company has to figure that out, and it's best to ask people. Once they understand where you're going, get feedback from people. When I meet with my staffs, we talk about all the time the goals and the plans and the strategy, and I ask them, well, how much more do you need from me? This is what I need to know from you. How can we both get the information that we need to do our jobs in the most efficient and effective manner? And the more we ask people and connect with them, the more we can learn about how to do that most effectively. It's okay to be aggressive. I'm aggressive, but it's not okay to be overly aggressive and overburden people with things. So at a couple companies, I asked for the planning cycle because, as I mentioned, I'm a planner, and I wanted to create my annual calendar for my team and my organization. And a couple of times I couldn't get that calendar from above in the organization, and so the result was we made our calendar, and then when I finally got the schedules, and oftentimes it might have been a week before the meeting instead of, I should have known about 6 months, then we had to change our whole schedule for the week. Not very effective use of time. So I doubt this guy was a very successful pole vaulter. Poor execution is such a important concept to grasp. We all know that trust is easy to destroy, hard to build, even harder to build if you don't keep your promises. And this is something that I emphasize very, very much with people. Keep your promises. I tell people, look, in my organization, if I'm not keeping my promises, you need to come and tell me. If I've not followed through my commitments, tell me about it. We need to keep our promises. We need to do what we say we're going to do, and then we should expect that from everyone in the business. So many of you are familiar with the concept SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T, and once you create those SMART goals and they're deployed across the organization, hold people accountable. Don't be nice and let people slide. One company I work for, Chris Hansen, when I joined the company, I got the feeling every year that if we didn't accomplish our goals, it was okay. If the company wasn't profitable, the guys at the top, guys and gals, it was okay. We just went on to next year until we were acquired by a private equity firm, and they implemented very good processes and structure. And then the whole company took off on a tear for years. But so poor execution is just not good for anybody. It lowers the bar for everyone. So I've, after some 40 years with working in many businesses, consulting, I've been in executive networks, visited lots of companies, and I have a philosophy about execution and business success. So I believe that there's only a few organizations that are good at execution for lots of reasons, but basically they display organizational discipline. They keep things as simple as possible, and they do the boring things every day, every year. And those are the companies that are most successful. And as I've been doing a lot of market research, talking to lots of folks in the market that I'm going to enter, I'm not surprised to hear about what people are experiencing from suppliers. Poor quality, inconsistent quality, poor delivery performance. It's always the same things. And they're actually not that difficult to fix, but it takes a lot of hard work and organizational discipline and keeping promises, etc. I love to measure things. And we go to sports events, and usually we pay attention to the score, right? And if you're a Packer fan and you went to a Packer game and there was no score on the scoreboard, it's probably be a little less exciting to go to the event. So people want to know the score. I mean, it's just part of our lives. And everything can be measured. Some people think that you can't measure everything. I disagree. Some things are harder to measure than others. Everything can be measured. So when we set up our KPIs, we need to figure out what's most important at all the levels of the organization to measure. We don't want to overload people with too many KPIs. We need just the right amount, measuring the most important things. So every unit needs to figure that out. And when you're implementing a strategy process, you need to figure out also at the different levels of the organization what it is that's most important to be measured. At the top of the organization, I recommend only a few of the most important ones. And yes, you're going to look at, a balanced scorecard of KPIs, but everything can't be important. So I like to say, here's the top three. And the top one for me in a manufacturing business is safety. So that's a clear number one. If we don't take care of our people, then we're not successful. And that includes physical safety, emotional safety, and intellectual safety. And I can tell you more about that later some other time, but that's the most important thing is safety. And then the other things I measure are delivery performance and quality. Everything is tied to those three for manufacturing organization, but you need to find out what it is that's most important to you. Boy, this subject of resources, it's a sensitive one in many organizations. It's a sore subject. It gets a lot of conversations. I have some opinions about this whole topic. First of all, as leaders, we need to figure out what are the best things to do. There's a lot of good things to do, but there's only a few best. There's always enough time to do the most important things in a day. I don't buy for myself or my organizations that there's not enough time. What that tells me is when people tell me that is they just don't, I haven't done a good enough job explaining what is most important, so that if you have, a list of goals and objectives, you still should know what is the most important thing you need to be working on. And that comes through lots of communications in performance reviews and KPIs, all these things we've been talking about. Now, another important concept, I think, is that I teach people to manage up. I just tell people, look, you need to learn to manage me. So what does that mean? Well, I expect a lot from people that report to me. I also give them a lot and remove their obstacles and give them the tools they need to do the job. And I make them uncomfortable. I tell them that's my job, is to make you uncomfortable in the right way. I need to be made uncomfortable. I need to keep going and learning. Everyone does. But when it comes to, let's say I say, hey, John, I'd like you to work on this project. So what I want that John to do is listen to it and understand it. And then I want John to say, okay, let me get back to you. Maybe he has to think about it. But then when he comes back to me, I don't want John to say, I can't do this. I don't want people to tell me what they can't do. I want people to tell me what they can do. We have a lot of control over our lives, more than we realize. There's a lot of things we can control. And one thing that we can control is our schedule. So I want John to come back and say, Barry, I understand you want me to do this. I can do that. That means that I think I need to change that deadline, down prioritize this, etc., and then I can do it. Okay with you? And when people do that with me, I may not like it because I want to get that done, but I really like that they're coming back and showing me that they understand the priorities, that we've done a good job communicating with each other, and they just made a business decision that I would agree with. I may not like it, but I agree with it. So that's a way to manage resources. And I learned that very early on in my career as an engineer, when I had maybe a staff of 3, and I frequently told the plant manager, oh, I don't have enough resources. And so one day he had a little conversation with me and said, Barry, there's always enough resources, whether it's capital, people, time. And so you get the point. There's always enough resources to do the most important things. And even if we're missing money, and I've been in situations where the leadership didn't want to spend money in certain areas. Okay, then we just need to get more creative and make sure we're aligned. Okay, I get it. So you're telling me that we're not going to prioritize capital spending or whatever it is. Okay, then this is how I am going to restructure my job, boss. Okay with you? So we need to have those conversations with people. Listen, listen, listen. People want to do a good job. They want to excel and they want to please. We need to help them through these difficult things. Again, everyone wants to know the score. We should make sure we're communicating progress or lack of progress. In the end, it's all progress. Whether we're going forward or going backwards, it's still progress if we use all these learning points in the proper way. Don't keep people guessing. If I don't tell them what's going on in the organization, you can be sure they're going to create their own stories. I would rather that I have something to say about the stories that people are creating and spreading in the organization. And tell people the truth. I've been in so many situations where management wants to tell half the truth. And sometimes it's even about things like, what's the salary range for a job? I think everyone should know that. Tell people the truth. They can handle it. Yeah, expect that people are smart and can make their own decisions. Don't think that you need to make decisions for them. So just around this subject of communication, I'm very, very competitive and I love to win. There's some things I've had to stop doing, like playing golf, because I don't know it well enough and I get too frustrated. So I just have to say, not for me. But when it comes to winning in an organization, winning doesn't mean that me as a leader, is getting all this acclamation and recognition, et cetera. Winning to me is that the whole team is successful and that I replace myself. In the end, that's my goal, is to replace myself, because that means I'm doing all these things we've talked about. And to implement strategy and improve the organization, and in the end it lets me move on to other things, which leads right back to celebrating recognition, success, and then a couple more points here. One is that I've been through the last year with all of you in my business and my career, and there's been a lot of crises, obviously, a lot of change, and we've had to do a lot of things that we're not comfortable and that we didn't want to do. Okay, but that's no excuse for any of us not to recognize people. Actually, it's more important in terms of in times of crises and things are changing very rapidly, to keep communicating, keep telling people these are the values. I thank you for behaving this way. Thank you for your effort. It's very, very important. Another important point related to celebration of success and recognition is training and development. I consider training and development as part of recognizing people. Now, in my last company, when COVID hit and the revenue dropped, and we had a discussion as a staff for my businesses, and they're together, there was about 70 million in revenue. We talked about, okay, where do we need to make adjustments in expenses, and so we came to the subject of training and development, and they just automatically assume, like most businesses, oh, we have to cut out training and development. And I said, nope, that's the last thing we're going to cut, because that is so necessary to develop our organization, keep that going, and send a message to people that they're important and that we need them to develop. And that's especially important in a flat organization. So I create flat organizations. And so that means there's not a lot of room to grow up and down, but there's a lot of room to grow laterally. It's very easy for us to give people assignments that help them grow laterally and involve them more in the business. Yes, I use job descriptions and hire around them, but I have talent development processes where I just get to know people and say, what are you good at? And sometimes I find out what people do outside work that are amazing. And I say, okay, how do we get that passion inside work? Okay, so let's give you some projects. Let's change your job. Let's put you someplace where you're going to turn on that passion. So it's so important to develop people and send a message that they are important and that they're needed. So one more slide, and this subject I've always found fascinating since I learned about it. Scenario planning. So what is scenario planning versus strategic planning or forecast planning? So often when we make strategic plans, we come up with one scenario. We maybe make a 3-year revenue forecast, one forecast. Okay, and then we make our plans, and that's great. It's still very important to deploy the process, right, practice all the principles I've talked about today, and make a plan. Okay, but as we know, life changes, right? Business changes, COVID comes, supply chain issues, lack of people to hire. We all experience these things. So what do? So what I do when I make long range plans is I actually create what if scenarios. And usually I have 3. So here's the plan. What we think is maybe a realistic case based on what we know today. But then what if we do better? What if we do worse? So in those 2 scenarios, what does that mean in terms of people and plans and spending? We talk about those things, and you can even go through the exercise of building a strategic plan, and then just have a meeting and say, okay, now let's tear it apart. What are some things that could go wrong? And then how would we react as an organization? So I believe these exercises are very important for training people to think strategically. And I find that strategic thinking is not a very common strength in organizations. And you can teach people at all levels to think strategically. I went into one business, took a tour, and I asked the operator who the customer was. Well, first of all, I asked them, what are you making and who are you making it for? They didn't know the answer to either one. Okay, that's a message. That's a data point, right? Okay, we need to do better at that, obviously. But so if those employees don't even know who they're making a part for, how are they going to think strategically? So when a crisis comes, they just wait and wait for management to tell them what to do. So what I do is I purposely use tools that create environments where people have to think. So for example, if some of you may have heard of a sales and operations planning process, it's basically where you have a long range plan in terms of maybe it's a production plan, it's a sales plan, could be an image plan, but you make this plan and you have discussions about it, and it's always to me it's always a rolling 12 months. So as management teams, you get people used to thinking out long term, and then you talk more about the business. What's happening here?
I think you're good on our end.
Okay, I just had a little glitch here with my phone. My phone is interrupting my screen. Sorry. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. So another tool is my last job, I had them create capacity planning tools. So the planning team was only, well, let me back up. When I came to the organization, they were finished. They were in the last months of 2 years of being behind on orders, 2 years of back orders. And I found that they were only planning for the next day, basically, because they knew that something would come in from customers that would change the whole schedule. And so I said, okay, the first thing is you lock in the whole week schedule. You don't change it. And then we're going to introduce the sales and operations planning process. We're going to introduce a capacity planning model that looks out 12 months and forces the planning team to look at the manpower versus the sales forecast. We introduced a what I call a master site plan that went out 10 years, but really only looked at 2 or 3 years. So all these tools help people to think more long-term. And that I think is such an important skill, that when you get people to think more long-term, then when crises come, they've already been thinking about the future, and they've already been, even behind the scenes in their brains been working on, okay, what if this all changes? What am I going to do? And I think you can respond much faster and be more agile. So that was it. It's a little longer than I thought it was going to be, but I'm happy to entertain questions.
If you guys would like to ask a question, please feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask that, or type it in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. That was extremely beneficial information, especially as I think a lot of us go into the strategic planning of budget season. And I really appreciate your approach of giving us real life examples of how you've done it, strategic planning. My question is, as you're kind of going through the strategic planning session, and you're talking about the SWOT, strategic initiatives, SMART goals, do you find that it's beneficial to have a third party to kind of moderate that process?
Yeah.
And if, okay.
Yes, I think it's very helpful if you can, because then you get to spend more time thinking. Otherwise, the leader has to focus on doing the facilitating, and you miss out. So, sometimes I've had somebody in another part of the organization that's a good facilitator come in and do it for a team, or you can hire somebody to do it. But, some of the outside consultants, you got to be careful who you choose, because they want to, I feel like, overburden the process. And, yeah, it is helpful if you can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and thanks for your comments. I wish I could see you all in person, because then I could see who's thinking and put you on the spot.
Yeah, this is everybody's opportunity to get information that can help lead them into a successful 2022. So any questions, be sure to ask them now.
Yep. Otherwise, again, if you have some questions, be happy to take some time on the phone with you. Don't worry about, I'm not going to charge you. If you wanted to do something longer term, okay, maybe we talk about it. But otherwise, I enjoy this stuff. Love to talk about it.
All right, well, maybe Barry, if we go to the chamber slide there at the end, and then we can stick around if people have questions too.
Okay. Oops, one up. There we go.
So just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking some time to learn about strategic planning, and hopefully picked up some tips that, as Kate said, we move into strategic planning season that you can implement. Huge thank you to Barry for being and joining us from Milwaukee today and sharing all of his knowledge. We certainly appreciate that. So just a shout out to those sponsors listed on the page, and then briefly wanted to mention to you guys what we have upcoming for chamber events. So remember, Get Moving Middleton next week Thursday. We're also going to be doing a session on building an authentic brand for your business and for yourself. And then middle of the month, we're kind of taking a look at the economic growth that the university provides to Dane County. So hopefully you guys can join us. We can stay on for a few more minutes if anyone else has thought of other questions, but we appreciate everyone being here and joining us. Thank you.
Hey, Barry, I have to know a little bit more about this manufacturing of bacteria. What does that mean?